Hey, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of The Future Is Now. It's episode number 4, and just thank you so much for tuning in. Today, we're talking about something fun. We're going to be talking about friendships. We're talking about how to have healthy friendships, relationships. I think that there's a lot of emphasis right now on dating, but we're actually going to be talking about the other side of relationships, which is friendships. Nobody wants to be a loner, so that's why we're talking about how to have healthy friendships. So if you're watching, thank you so much. If you're watching on Apple Podcasts, make sure that you subscribe and leave a review at the bottom. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you subscribe, like the video, and comment. But we're with two of my good friends, Kyle and Lane. I've been friends with Kyle for a really long time, and I've been friends with Lane for just a couple of years now. So we're going to be talking about how to engage and have healthy friendships. I hope that this episode blesses you and challenges you. Again, thank you so much for tuning in to The Future Is Now. Well, hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Future Is Now podcast. I'm with two of my friends, Kyle and Lane. And today we're talking about friendships. And so we'll give a little bit of context to how we met. I met Kyle in 3rd grade. Shout out Brulette Elementary.
Come on, Bobcats.
Come on, Bobcats.
Let's go.
And I knew Lane just for a couple of years. And so it's kind of a nice contrast of a really long friendship, a newer friendship. So we're going to be talking about a couple of things in terms of what we look for in friendships, challenges. But how did you guys meet?
Oh, that's a really good question. I actually don't remember. Is that church? I remember.
It was definitely at church. I think we were kind of acquaintances for like the first year or so that I went there, just kind of serving on the same team. And then when I was moving out of a house with a couple from the church, I needed to find 3 roommates. Otherwise, I'd have to move back in with my parents. And so Kyle was one of the guys that I reached out to. And
ironically enough, the other 3 guys actually didn't know Lane, and I kind of knew Lane.
True.
And so it was like, hey, there's this guy, Lane, who's probably like way richer than all of us and probably cover the bills if we ever don't need or don't have money. So let's move in with him. Everyone's like, yeah, he's like kind of cool. I think he doesn't really talk though. Yeah. I was like, that's like a perfect roommate. So yeah. And then the rest is history. We lived together for 3 years, 2 years,
like 3.5 years.
Yeah.
It's a blossoming partnership.
Yep. Now we're both married and not living together. So that's good.
Look at that.
Come on.
God provides. So I think it's important, especially as leaders, obviously to have really good friendships in your lives. And I feel like when you look at a lot of people that are at a leading capacity, unfortunately, a lot of times for some reason, it's just really hard to find quality friendships. And I feel like that's something that not a lot of people talk about is as you get older, the harder it is to find really good friendships. And so you'll find somebody that's super successful and leading amazing things, but then you look at their personal life and you're like, oh, they literally don't hang out with anybody. They don't, they don't have fun. Right. So for you guys, I guess, because how old are both of you guys?
I'm 31.
I'm 26.
26 and 31. So as you've grown older, has it been more difficult to find friendships for you guys? And maybe like what have you looked for in a friend? I know that you guys were talking about, it was proximity. You guys were living together, but I guess what kind of made that friendship continue to grow for you guys?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it is infinitely harder, in my opinion, to continue and like keep relationships, especially good friendships when you get older, because just life happens. Like,
right.
Like I don't live next door to Timmy anymore. Like we were best friends when I was in 3rd grade, and we could hang out all the time and like we would go play sports out in the yard or whatever. But now it's like I have a job, I have a wife, I have other relationships and things and leadership and ministry that I have committed to. And so I think it is so much more difficult to keep relationships, but I still think it's important. I think for Lane and I think what kind of kept us together is just finding common ground and knowing like, okay, like this is what we both like, this is what we both enjoy, and just making sure that we always were building on that relationship somehow. Yes, it was easier because we did live together, but even now we don't live together, and it's still like a blossoming friendship, even if it's just sending each other stupid things on Instagram or talking about random things like sports and just like having fun in a relationship, not making it always so serious.
Yeah, for sure. I would definitely say, I would argue that proximity is probably the biggest thing that draws friends apart. And it's honestly super easy to do that. Like you're like, okay, this person isn't in my circle anymore.
Yep.
I still love them, but I might not reach out to them as much. And I think that sometimes bridges can be burnt in that kind of like unspoken, like I don't live next to you, you don't live next to me, whether you're intentionally doing it or unintentionally. So yeah, I think same thing that just Kyle said is I think you just continue to be present in that person's life. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be present every single day. But I think that you have to like equally reciprocate like the intent on prolonging this relationship and continuing it. And sometimes it'll be like super easygoing, nonchalant, like Kyle was saying, like sending each other funny stuff. And other times it'll just kind of be like, man, like I need somebody to kind of lean on right now. And I need somebody to speak a truth into my life that maybe I can't see for myself. And so, I think that it's making that conscious like effort to continue something.
Yeah. I think kind of what you were saying is knowing what you want out of a relationship. I mean relationship, but friendship for that matter. I think there can be different types of friendships in our lives. And I think that sometimes we think that every friend in our life should be, it should be our best friend. It should be. But the reality is like, I mean, as I have, grown older, I mean, I'm only 26, but like the older I get, the more it's more like the relationship in my life become more compact and it's super meaningful, but it's almost like it's less and less and less, which is okay for me. And that doesn't mean I have less friends. It just means that like the proximity, like you're saying, I don't have time like I did in high school to hang out with 20 people a week, this day and age, like I hang out with, I mean, us three hang out all the time.
Sure.
And I'll have a couple other close friends that I hang out with on a consistent basis. But I think there is something to be said about sometimes we get really frustrated when there's expectations, but you have to know A, what your expectation is going forward with somebody in terms of a friendship, and B, what their expectation is for you. Because I think that's another thing where you can get an argument or things can get weird is if, there's different types of expectations on what the friendship is.
Sure.
Does that make sense? And so for you guys, I guess, what would you encourage somebody that's maybe in a boat where they're saying, I just feel like I need more friendships? Because that's always, I mean, we think about like kindergarten, making friends, schools, easy making friends, but
recess was like the best time.
Recess.
I have 15 friends.
Exactly. You're playing kickball, you're in proximity. And I mean, a lot of things as kids were easier, but it was just like easier striking up a conversation. But like, it's not like I'm going to, you're going to be at Safeway next to somebody grocery shopping and all of a sudden you're like, hey, you want to hang out with me? So for you guys, I guess, what would you encourage someone that's saying like, hey, I feel like I don't have meaningful relationships. How do I take that step to get them?
Yeah. I think you can do that in a couple different ways. I mean, I think that we were talking about like kids have it a little bit easier because they're kind of forced into those settings. But I think that honestly, and I think too that like the young adult community sometimes is like hard to find friends because it's such a big transition like stage in your life. Like a lot of people moved away for college or a job, or other people are coming back as other people are leaving. And so like your crew that you're like normally with isn't there anymore. So I do think that you can kind of force yourself into a community. I mean, I did that before I started coming to the church that we all go to now. I was at a church prior to that didn't really have a ton of young adults, and I had just come back up from college in Oregon, and all my friends were either married or away out of state still. And so I finally came to a point where I was just kind of like, I need to figure out what I'm doing, and I need to have like friends, because this isn't cutting it. Like I probably spent 2 years after I came back up from school just kind of doing my job, coming home, and that was about it. And I could really feel that kind of void in my life. And so I really forced myself to go to our young adult service at that time and just find friends. And I do think sometimes it is appropriate just to kind of go up to somebody and be like, hey, do you want to be friends? Like not at the grocery store, kind of like what you're saying. Like that's kind of random and weird, but creepy. I think based on the setting, you can go in there and just kind of be present within a group of people. And I think more often than not, you're going to find without you saying like, hey, I want to be friends with you, just based on your actions and what you do, that you'll probably get into a community.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, I totally agree. I think it's funny. Having a smaller circle of friends doesn't necessarily like mean you're like less popular or like I go and I think back in like high school, it's like, oh, the popular kids like were like the kids who had tons of friends and like everyone to be around them. I don't think necessarily it's like young adults now, and I mean adults or whatever you want to call us, that having a smaller circle of friends is necessarily a bad thing. So if you're like, man, like I only have like 2 friends, I'm like, that's awesome. If those 2 friends are like good friends where you can like have good conversation, have good relationship, and you can really like invest into those 2 relationships, that's awesome. If it's like 10 people for you, that's awesome. I think it's just where you're at. I'm naturally like more introverted, which is funny because most people don't think I am. And it's really hard for me to make new friends. Like it's extremely difficult, but at the time I agree kind of with Lane, like you just kind of have to buck up and be like, okay, like if I want to have more friends, then I'm going to have to either put myself out there, because naturally most people aren't going to do the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, it's kind of getting over yourself, because there's always going to be that insecurity of, and it's weird because like, it's just a natural feeling that even I'll feel, which is not like valid at all. Like, oh man, I hope these people think that I'm cool. Like what? It's just
I'm like, I wish I
where
had more
nobody's
friends.
even like thinking about me. Like
for
go into a room and you're like, oh my gosh, I hope that I'm making a good impression. But like nobody even notices that you're in there, you know? So I think it's kind of, getting over yourself, okay, making that step. And then B, just, taking a step and just hanging out with people. I mean, it can be something that's super, it seems forced, but friendships are they're just needed. I mean, they're needed to have fun in life. They're needed to have an outside perspective when you and your spouse is fighting and you're like, you know what, I'm going to see what Kyle and Hayden say about this. And then they're like, Adrian's right. And you're like, dang it, so
you're just
like,
pissed.
it's like you need that perspective in your life, and you need those voices around you, because A, it helps you grow, and B, it just makes life more fun and enjoyable, because, I mean, that's why I love the church, because I feel like we were made to be in community. Right. So it should extend past, church service. It should extend towards hanging out with people in general. But usually we do like a hot takes section where we like rattle off. I only have 2, but we'll sit on these couple for
I'm excited.
a little bit.
Sure.
Yeah,
Lane's really good at these.
Yeah, no, I know.
No, he's really good at.
Lane,
you are. No,
Lane
you're
brings
really
the spice. Okay, so the first hot take is talking, because you will hear this a lot preached in 2 different ways. Of if your friends, if say somebody's listening and they're like, hey, my friends are actually not the greatest influence on my life. So it's the difference, like, should you totally ditch your friends if they're not a good influence on your life, or should you be that example for them? Because I've heard both. I've heard, hey, if you got friends that are having a bad influence on your life, check your circle, like get new friends. I've also heard, hey, be a light to the people around you. So where do you guys fall on that stance?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm really excited for your answer. No, I want to hear yours first. Oh yeah.
I think that it's a fine balance between kind of what you had said, between those 2 options of like, I'm out, or like shine the light of Jesus on those friends who might never have that opportunity again. I mean, we see a lot of different scriptures in the Bible, both Old and New Testament, that talks about like the effects of bad or good company, and if if one member of the body is kind of acting out, then cut it off, because it's better not to have that than to have one that's corrupting the rest of the members. And so I think that there are scriptures that do talk about eliminating yourself and kind of super like drastic wording, but like flee from that scenario. But I also do think that the Lord has put you in a place with those people. Like maybe they were your friends and you were doing some of those things with them to start off with, and then like Jesus got a hold of you. And so I think that we are commanded to shine our light on them as well. But I do think that it is a fine balance in the sense that you can only do so much, and then it's up to the Lord to do the rest. Right. And so like you plant the seed, but I do think that if the influence is there and it's negative and it continues to be negative, I think you can still be friends with them. But I think that kind of like what you were talking about is you have to have a solid circle. So maybe they're your friends, but they might not be the ones that are pouring into your life as much. Maybe they're your friends for the sole sake of, hey, I still want to hang out with you and I still want to be a positive like influence in your life, but currently right now I don't see that you are having that effect on me. And so I need to kind of prioritize how I am operating with my friends so that I can be the best leader, so that I can be the best husband, the best boyfriend, etc. And so, yeah, I think it's a fine balance. And I think that more often than not, you'll know when you've crossed the line or not. Like you have that sense of moral direction or discernment, and you'll identify whether you're like, I might have crossed the line a little bit. Like this person isn't that great for me, or maybe I should do a little bit more. Maybe I should share the message and the gospel with this person. So, yeah.
Dude, maybe unpopular opinion. Drop them. Like, it's okay to not be friends with someone.
Yeah.
I'm not saying like you have to be mean to that person or you have to not care about that person or you don't have to love that person.
Right.
But it's okay to be like, hey, this friendship isn't beneficial for me anymore. Like, I think people so often it's like, oh my gosh, well, like, I don't want to offend this person. I don't want them to think that like I'm like a bad person or whatever. I'm like, at some point, like, you just have to be a little selfish with like yourself. And I think there's a lot of bad influences and friends that I had like back in junior high and high school that I'm no longer like friends with. They're like, I still love them. I've even talked to a few of them on occasion. But like, I'm not going out on a Friday night hanging out with them. Like, I'm not like going over their house and doing whatever and hanging out for hours and hours on end. It's okay to drop friends and be like, okay, like this friendship no longer works for me. And that's okay. Yeah. I think some people just kind of think it's like, oh my gosh, I'm like such a bad person or a bad Christian or X, Y, and Z, you name it. But I think personally, I think it's okay just to be like, hey, it's just not working for me. And they're probably not going to take it super well. It will probably cause some really awkward tension. Yeah. But again, we kind of talked about it before, like you just kind of have to get over it. Like it's going to be okay. Like I promise both of you will find friends that will kind of mesh in your circle. But yeah, I think I'm drop them. Yeah. I think it's good.
Well, I think
it's okay.
If it's a detriment to your well-being, I think that obviously that's like an extreme case where like, I just can't be around you anymore because you bring this out of me or you keep this inside of me which isn't supposed to happen.
Totally. Still love them.
Yeah,
and
I totally agree with that.
Still like you can be a light and not be in their immediate sphere. You 100%. Can still like help them like quote unquote and not be in their immediate like friendship or they are your immediate friend.
Well, yeah. And the byproduct of a friend being dropped, maybe it's a wake up call, you know?
Yeah. Hey, like maybe my head is like not on like my shoulders correctly. So.
Yeah. It's like, it's funny because when we talk about, you're saying people think, what will people think of me? But when it comes down to it, I mean, I think that, I would argue top 3 biggest influences in your life, in your trajectory, is who you surround yourself with. So when you're talking about your life, like we're talking, we're talking about offending someone versus the trajectory of your entire life. Because I feel like we've all seen it where we've seen somebody who we think, man, if they would only get out of that circle of friends,
stayed a little too long.
Right. What could have they done? Like, what could they be? You know, and it's just a struggle because everybody sees it and everybody can recognize it. So when you're talking about something as important as the trajectory and the mission and the purpose that God has called on your life, then I think it seems drastic to drop friends, but at the same time, you have to be really honest with yourself. And I think a lot of it has to do with maturity too and understanding yourself. I think there was times in my life where, I could go into settings because I knew like, hey, none of this that I'm around is a temptation to me at all. Right. So I can be there. I'm not going to participate, but it's hard to, and that's why also you need really important friends to be able to tell you because it's whether you're able to pull people up or whether they're dragging you down. Right. One's always going to be happening. And so to identify what that is for you and your friends group is huge.
Yeah.
So the second question, this one's a fun one.
Yes.
So let's talk about friends of the opposite sex.
Oh God.
So guys that are, and we could obviously talk in a marriage context, but like, let's talk marriage context. Let's talk single context of, let's say somebody's watching, a girl's listening, a guy's listening, and they're like, I actually have, maybe quite a few friends of the opposite sex, or my best friend maybe is of the opposite sex.
I have more than one best
there's
friend.
a lot there, but let's kind of, hover around this for a second.
Right, teacher Lane.
Oh, me?
Oh yeah, teacher Lane.
Okay. So I think coming from a teacher standpoint, like when I'm teaching, this isn't necessarily like a peer relationship.
Yeah.
It's more so a professional relationship. But when I'm like in my classroom and I'm meeting with a female student, it's inevitable that we're at some point going to be one-on-one. And so what I always do is I always keep my classroom door open. I never meet up in my actual office because my office is smaller quarters. Yeah. And I'll always have the student sit on the other side of the desk. And so when they need to show me something, they'll just kind of flip their notebook, iPad, laptop, whatever around so that I can check it out with them. And that really sets that boundary. Like, I'll never cross that. They never cross this. And it's not like I'm like, stop. Like, I just set it up. I set the tone by like kind of what I do. And I'm like, oh, like there's a chair right there. Like take a seat or whatever. I think you can kind of do the same thing with your friends of the opposite sex. I think, well, first off, I think when you're married, you don't necessarily have like a really like personal friendship with somebody from the opposite sex anymore. Because of your spouse, out of respect and love.
Like, it's not.
My wife would kill me.
With me and Adrian, it's not like, hey, that's my friend. It's our friend now.
Right. Yep.
You know?
Absolutely.
I'm not gonna have a friendship with a girl that like Adrian doesn't know or doesn't have.
100%.
You know, because that's just it's respect towards Adrian. It's boundaries that are healthy within a marriage context, and there's just not there's not a need for it. Like I just don't understand the need for me to have a close friendship with a girl that I wouldn't get out of a friendship with a guy.
100%.
You know, like what?
Or with a group of people collectively.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with that. I think that like if you're friends with a girl that your wife isn't a friend with, or vice versa, she's friends with a guy that you're not friends with, I think there's maybe some boundaries that probably need to be discussed. And I think that you probably should be collective friends, kind of like what you were saying. I think like once you're kind of in the engaged married area, that's kind of the rule and boundaries just because of the sanctity of marriage. I think once it's below that, kind of when you're single, I still think that you need to have boundaries. If there's ever anybody who says that they're best friends with somebody of the opposite
they're
sex,
lying.
There is feelings in there.
One way.
Like, they're lying.
I know that there are going to be a lot of people right now that they're going to be like, no way. Like my best friend is a girl and I don't like her at all.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sorry, you do.
Yes.
Like,
Listen,
or they do.
Yes, it's one or the other.
Yeah.
There's feelings on one side. And if you're defending your position right now and you don't like the other person, hate to break it to you, but they like you.
Yeah, 100%.
You're lying to yourself.
Yeah. I just think like if you're, no matter what stage of life you're in, if you're like, you should never just be alone with somebody unless you have feelings for them or you're married or whatever. Because I think at that point, like, there's gray area and it's hard to decipher like who's where, who stands where, things like that. And that also is sometimes where like the gossip kind of comes into play. We're like, oh, well, you were like with that person. So like there's just kind of cross wires all over the place. So yeah.
There's no way for a guy to have a best friend that is a girl. There's no way for a girl to have a best friend that is a guy. It doesn't happen. It's always messy. And guess what? At the end of your best friendship, you're going to end up hurting one or each other or both of you, honestly, at that point. So I think it's just so funny. I think that people just don't understand it because there's things like that you should only be like as a guy, there are only things you should be telling guys.
True.
And like your close guy friends, there are things that girls should only be telling girls. Because I'm not a girl, I will never understand fully the opposite sex. Like I just won't. That's just normal. And so I just think it's always so funny being in like youth ministry. It's like, oh yeah, like that's my best friend, and I'm like, what are you like? Do you
trying to make
are
out?
You like you're playing yourself? Like you really don't understand. Like I don't care if it's 1 month down the road, 2 months down the road, 2 days later, one of you is going to end up catching feelings for the other. And then you guys have this whole situation where it's probably not going to work out because you are such close friends and you divulged everything to someone. And I just think it's like such a unhealthy thing to do. But that doesn't mean that you can't have friends of the opposite sex. Don't get me wrong. But I think you guys both said it. Like just boundaries are so important in those contexts because once you cross like the boundary, like once you are a guy and you divulge something that's like really personal to a girl, it's like kind of like turning on the faucet and it's just leaking and it won't stop because now it's like, okay, well, I've told them this really personal thing. And now somehow, some way, they might end up dating someone else. They might get married to someone else. And now I've divulged this really uncomfortable, possibly, or this really like inmost thought that I've had.
Yeah.
But they're not expressing the same thing to me, or that they're divulging it to like someone else, which is super weird. So,
Yeah. Well, and chances are, if you're best friends with that person and they start dating somebody else, you're not going to be best friends anymore. Like, you're like, okay, I lost my shot. Like I don't know. So,
Yeah, it's
wild.
I think it's important, obviously, to have boundaries, and it's kind of, I hate how it feels. It sometimes feels like weird when you make boundaries, because you're like, I'm not trying to be weird by any means, and it's not like, sometimes when we say, hey, for instance, and I have the same thing, like, I'm never going to be alone one-on-one with another woman, A, without Adrian there, or B, in a setting like, if I ever have a guest come onto the podcast, like, I'll always have someone here to help out and whatever. And when I say that, it's just like, I almost feel like I need to like preface it with like, I'm not trying to be weird. Like, I'm not, but it's just to protect everybody, it's just good to have boundaries. So so you have no shadow of a doubt that anything could get misconstrued or anything like that.
It's like, I feel like we're not like against having friends that are like not the same. I think some of those relationships, like, they can be really healthy. So like, I feel like people are gonna be like, oh my gosh, do they like hate like,
we don't like stiff arm.
Yeah, do you guys like hate women? Like, no. Like, it's just those relationships can be healthy, and they can actually bring out like really good things and like out of you and out of the other person. But at the end of the day, like, it's just not gonna work.
And if you are a guy and you have a lot of girlfriends, or you're a girl and you're,
do you want that reputation?
Like, I just get along with guys.
Oh my God.
But you have to ask yourself why. Why do you get along with girls more, or why do you get along with guys more? I think that's a question that you probably should be asking yourself, because in my experience, the healthiest, strongest relationships that I have, besides my wife, is obviously with guys, because like you said, we understand each other, like we get each other.
I will never understand tears. I don't get them.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, the way that women and men were designed and built, there is, like, obviously with me and Adrian, we have a very strong emotional connection, right? Because that's just the way that God made us. Like, God made man for women. So obviously we have a very strong emotional connection, and it's dangerous, like kind of what you're saying, when you start to divulge information towards another female, because you don't want that type of emotional connection with anybody else, obviously. And sometimes we can, especially if we're not careful, just casual conversation can turn, and all of a sudden, you start divulging information that you're not supposed to. So I think protecting yourself from that is huge.
Different layers.
Yeah.
It's like an onion. Just like an onion.
That was good. That was a good hot take.
That was great.
What would you guys say are key characteristics to be a friend to other people? So because obviously friendship is a two-way street. And whenever if I'm ever talking to somebody and they're like having issues with somebody, it's interesting when you ask the question, well, like, what have you like, what have you given? It's like that. Wow, this person hasn't texted me in 6 months. Well, like you haven't texted them in 6 months. So, what would you guys say that you try and be a friend? Like, how do you, or what characteristics do you try and have towards other people in terms of being a friend?
Yeah, I think honestly, this is something I've had to work on super hard, because I'm really bad at it. It's just being like present when conversations arise. It doesn't matter if they're serious. It doesn't matter if they're like not serious. Just like being like actively there. I'm like really scattered brain. So like someone could be talking, like Lane could be talking to me about something, and then like 4 seconds in the conversation, I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Which, if you know me, that happens a lot. But I think just like one thing that you want in a friend and you want to reciprocate as a friend is just being actively present. Like, everyone wants to like feel wanted and felt like heard. And so like as a friend, like you want to be that person's like, okay, like if Spence comes to me about something, I can be like, okay, like I'm here. You have my full attention. If Lane comes to me about something, you have my full attention. And so I think that's like kind of the key thing for me when it comes to like being a really good friend, is like, you just have to be actively there. And like, you might not get a phone call every single day, but when you do get a phone call, like, okay, are you there? Are you present? Are you listening? Are you like really like there for them? Or is it like, oh my God, like, okay, I have to answer this phone call, but I have a billion other things going on in my head. And so, yeah, I think actively just being present, actively listening, I think it's just super important in a friendship.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's huge. Just being there, being available, and like making it known that you're available is a great attribute for both sides, not just for us, but for the other person that's in the friendship too. One thing I always like kind of ask myself, not selfishly or anything like that, is just kind of like, what am I like pulling from them, and like what are they pulling out of me? And I've definitely fallen short before in friendships where maybe I'm looking at the relationship more one-sided, like, oh, like this person's great for me, but like I'm not really doing anything to pour into their life.
Right.
And I think it is like, you have to reciprocate that way. And I think that that's where we were talking about a little bit earlier, like that's where maybe sometimes there's miscommunication, like when one person is trying to do more than the other person. But there's not communication, like like exactly what you were just saying, like, okay, well, this person hasn't talked to me in forever. And then you're like, well, did you talk to them? And you're like,
My favorite.
No, I guess not. And so it's just like again, I've fallen short in that area before. And I think it's just realizing that, one, you're not perfect, but you still want to try to have excellence in those areas so that you can be the best friend to that person, and that can inspire them to be one of the greatest friends to you as well. And it might not be your best friend, but that for any relationship, you always want to try to do that regardless of like the depth of that friendship.
Yeah. I mean, I think as long as your heart is, I mean, this can apply to anything, honestly, but like when you have a selfless heart and you're going out and saying, what can I do for other people? You're going to find people that have that same type of heart for you.
Sure.
And the worst place that we can get is kind of in a relationship where we just feel like we're giving and not reciprocating that. But eventually you'll be able to find people that want to invest into you. And that's where the best friendships develop, is to have that, because you never want to just feel like you're giving and you're like asking, oh, please, like, can we hang out today?
Begging.
No, I can't. Oh, tomorrow, So I would say, put your standards high too, in terms of how you treat your friends, but then also like what you're asking for in return or expecting, because, friendships are meant to build each other up, and it gets exhausting if it's one-sided.
Yeah.
And just have fun. Like, if you're friends with someone and you're not having fun with that person, it might be time for you to like have a friend like dumping session or whatever. But like the reason like I love like Lane and like you, Spence, is like we have tons of fun together.
Yeah.
And I think that's so important. I think people kind of think like what Lane said, like, oh, what can I get out of this friendship? And then you're like, oh my gosh, like this is so exhausting. And then you're like, well, if you're like not like enjoying your time with this person, maybe it's like not like a great friendship. Maybe it's more of like an acquaintance where it's like you hang out like every now and then and like talk casually, but like when it comes to like a friend, it's like I want to have fun with my friends. I want it to like still like I can have like a deep, meaningful conversation. I can have like come to you guys with problems, but also I'm like I could just hang for 3 hours laughing my face off.
Yeah. I mean, this is probably one of the most cliche like phrases ever, but like, I mean, actions speak louder than words. And I think that most of us, I could probably say, we have not been like, okay, what do I want? What are the 10 best things I want in a friend? And I like write it down like I'm doing it for a spouse or something like that. Like, I think that you say that like to yourself, like, what do I want in a friendship?
Yeah.
And then you just observe people and you're like, that person's cool. Like, I want to get in that person's circle. And just by being present and just by showing them who you are in a genuine way, and then them returning that, can create really good friendships. And I think, I mean, that's kind of what we did. We weren't like, you meet all these check
you check all my boxes
like,
for a friend, Spencer. So you're it.
Great. Well, that's all the time that we have for today's episode, but I just want to thank you guys for coming out, and thank you for being a great friend to me and to be able to be that example. So for you guys watching, I hope that this blessed you. I hope it challenged you to go out and make new friends. Don't be a weird loner, and we'll see you next time on The Future
Don't be a weird
Is Now.
loner.
See you guys
Come
later.
on.